Hello students, in my previous video lecture, I discussed with you women role as writer under gynocritiques. And when we discussed women role as writer, that means women as reader of the text written by women, and at the same time how women they can be creator of their own literature, which includes their own history, their own theory, their own psychodynamics, their own genre, their own style, etc. All in all, we notice that Showalter proposes to make use of all those differences upon which patriarchy has built its empire till now. So Showalter is highly critical of all such evaluations and interpretations which declare expression of femininity in female text as expression of or representation of their temperament, whereas expression of masculinity in men's text taken as their representation of mastery and control over their emotion. Now, if I have to point out Ecriture Feminine under this article, Feminist Criticism in the Wilderness, I will locate that page number where this description comes, the heading with which gynocritiques comes in the text Feminist Criticism in the Wilderness. It is defining feminine, gynocritiques and women's taste. Last two paragraphs of this particular point deals with the Ecriture Feminine idea. Hence, while dealing with the Ecriture Feminine, I will talk today about Jack Lacan, because Ecriture Feminine, that means we are focused on Elaine Showalter and Julia Kristeva. And if you have to understand these two French feminist critiques, you have to know first Lacan. As we have already discussed that there are basic differences between Anglo-American feminist criticism and French feminist criticism. And if I have to point that one difference between Anglo-American feminist critiques and French feminist critiques, it is, for example, Showalter and her group believes in the celebration of unique female experiences. And unique female experiences, that means the collective consciousness or the collective womanhood idea, and how women they are categorized collectively on the basis of unique female experiences because they all share the cycle of sex and menstruation, childbirth, puberty. That means specific women experiences. This is just one example. And if you look at the celebration of the American feminist critiques, they believe in developing, and not only they believe, rather they have developed female tradition, that is female literary tradition. Whereas French feminist critiques, they do not consider themselves as part of the female literary tradition, and they point out women's repression in language, art and psychoanalysis. For this matter, they move to Freud, and better to say New Freud, Jack Lacan, Derrida and Roland Barthes. So if we have to understand how Ecriture Feminine functions and why we are discussing here this idea known as Ecriture Feminine, because Showalter has given her opinion about this particular idea, how she deals, and still why she considers it as part of gynocriticism. So first, that Ecriture Feminine, that means unique differences or specificity, Elaine Showalter and Julia Kristeva, they also highlight. But for highlighting this, they go to Lacan. So what is Lacanian idea? So as I described right now, that Lacan can be called as French Freud. Why Lacan can be called as French Freud? Because Lacan has, just like Freud, given emphasis over the unconscious layer of mind. And as per Freudian description, unconscious is the agency, unconscious structure is responsible for reserving in its territory all the libidinal wishes and desire. So So you know the distinction or the mapping of the human mind that Lacan has done. It is conscious, unconscious and subconscious, in which he says that major part of the human mind is unconscious, and the conscious act which we perform, it is controlled or it is regulated by the unconscious layer of mind. So unconscious is the central agency, that central force, that central organizing framework through which human mind functions. And in this unconscious layer of mind, mostly the ideas and the contents available to us, they are libidinal in nature. They are the unfulfilled libidinal wishes and desires. So in this way, as per Freud, the moment we perform any conscious act, it is sublimation of the unconscious material. So the idea, the practice, the thing that is not allowed to us practice by society, or any activity which is not as per the propriety or norms of society, it gets buried into the unconscious layer of mind, and in reformed manner, in changed form, it gets sublimated into the conscious form. I described here Freud, this conscious and unconscious function, because exactly Lacan does the same thing. Lacan also gives, just like Freud, emphasis over the unconscious layer of mind, and he says that unconscious is structured like a language, or unconscious layer of mind is responsible for the constitution of the self. Idea of self is a construction, and how this idea of self gets constructed, it gets constructed into the unconscious layer of mind. That means Lacan says that it is important to know the construction of language, because language constructs the self. Language is the means of communication. Through language, our ideas, our understanding, our process of socialization, it takes place. So we can say that on the basis of Freudian analysis, Lacan converts the entire understanding or entire constitution process of self on the basis of the linguistical structures, and for that matter, Lacan goes to the crucial post-structuralist notion of Derrida, and in the crucial post-structuralist notion of Derrida, as we have already done this Derridian discourse, we know that how Saussure was denied and how Saussure is rejected in his own ground. So Lacan modifies those concepts, and he comes up like Saussure has stated that signifier and signifieds are the two realms of a sign system. Signifier is basically the physical element and signified is the mental concept. So Saussure has given equal importance to both the aspects called signifier and signified, whereas Lacan gives primacy to signifier over any other relationship. That means just as Derrida has said, or Derrida states that signified is absent on the basis of the arbitrariness of the language, in the same way, Lacan says that signified is absent, signified is not present, then only signifier is present. So there is relationship between signifier and signifier. That means if you discuss any kind of relationship, and if, for example, you come to the sign system, there is signifier versus signifier, not signifier, not sign versus sign. So this is how we see that just like the Derridian analysis, just like the crucial post-structuralist notion, Lacan also declares that unconscious layer of human mind is structured like language. That means if you, so what Freud says, that if you have understanding of the unconscious layer of mind, that means you have understanding of the real state of mind of that person. So how to understand unconscious layer of mind? Lacan says that unconscious is structured like language. What kind of language he believes in, this is now to understand. Lacan believes in the structuralization of that language which is of post-structuralist nature or which is of Derridian nature. And as we know that how language is codified, how language functions, who is the codifier, who was the performer, who formulates all these ideas of the gender, how the gendrical notions are formulated, how the notion of caste system is formulated, how this notion of bourgeois and proletariat is formulated. So ultimately, these discourses we have gone through in our SSP, structure, sign and play. But now to understand the construction of self and where feminists are more interested. So Lacan, when he turns all these phases of Oedipal crisis or Oedipal phases in the stage of language acquisition, once again I repeat the idea that French feminists, that means the critiques, French feminist critiques who are responsible for dealing with this idea of écriture feminine, they are interested in that description which Lacan has done in terms of language acquisition. Language acquisition, that means you understand language learning process. So how language learning takes place? This language acquisition of Lacan is dependent upon Oedipal phases of Freud. Just as Freud talks about the psychosexual stages of the development, oral, anal and phallic, in the same way Lacan talks about symbolic, imaginary and symbolic. In between imaginary and symbolic there is mirror phase of Lacanian stages of language acquisition. Now one by one I am going to deal what is this imaginary and symbolic and how in between mirror phase comes. When there is birth of a child, from birth up to 6 months, Lacan says that child lives in the imaginary phase. And you may notice that from birth till 6 months, there is no such process of language acquisition. So, child is having indistinguishable unity with the mother. So, I may say that mother and child, children and mothers, they do not have distinct identity to each other, right? Although we know that the moment birth of a child takes place and the separation of child is from the cutting of the umbilical cord, but in a way Lacan suggests that till imaginary phase, child umbilical cord is separated, but for each and everything, understanding, requirement, a child is dependent upon mother and mother is also hormone wise completely indulged in the child. Mother is always indulged in the child, that's another issue. But in terms of language learning, there is no such identification of the separate language, and whatever is existing in the terms of child till 6 months of birth, it is in terms of mother. So I sum up here that till 6 months, when a child is in the imaginary phase, there is no such distinction between mother and child. And from imaginary, when child enters into the symbolic phase, language learning begins. So we commonly know that when child becomes of 6 months, there is language learning starts, and ma, pa, ba and all these terms they start pronouncing, and this is how the kind of community and the kind of culture a child is born, same language child will utter, because you know this learning is a process, and they learn from the culture. So you are Bengali and Punjabi and Hindi and English and so on. So accordingly language will be learned by the child, and they will start producing the symbols of that particular language. So the symbolic phase, that means the entry of a child into the language learning properly, and from here the process of socialization begins. Now what is this process of socialization? This process of socialization, when you come to know through the language system, that whenever that phallus, Lacan makes the use of word phallus. So phallus is the word that is used for the male anatomy, male organ, and it is symbolic of authority, autonomy. Ultimate power is associated in a family with the phallus. So phallus is the main organizing signifier or organizing framework of society. So child automatically learns that my mother, she is obeying to the father, sisters, they are obeying to the brothers, and all the girls, how they are treated by family members, by society, by culture, and girls, they are objectified, instrument of lust, sexual instrument. And not only this is sexual instrument, like entire society is understood, or it can be defined and explicated through the system of language, because through language communication takes place. And this is how children, they understand automatically. Anybody doesn't tell them that look, male is superior and female is inferior, or in caste Brahmins are, suppose if Indian society it is, that Brahmins are superior and rest of the caste, they are inferior. Nobody tells to a child. How child learns it? Through the process of language learning, he learns the society, and this is how he comes to know the entire world. But in between of imaginary and symbolic, there is one phase that is called as mirror phase. So when a child from 6 months, he starts entering into the symbolic phase. That mirror phase, when child, just as when a child of 6 months looks to himself and herself, that okay, it's me. And sometimes you may do play with this this very thing. You may play with the children, like you take a child in your lap and just you hold a child and you look into the mirror, and child will look at himself or herself and smile. That means its child starts identifying that it's me. And in this mirror phase, that's why Lacan calls it as mirror phase, so that we may easily understand. In this mirror phase, there is development of the sense of self. That means self is constructed when most of the time child is unconscious. Because from 6 months this language learning starts, language learning takes place, but it is just the intervenient phase, in between phase. So he's in the transition phase from imaginary to symbolic. And in this transition phase, this idea of self takes place. Now this idea of self is definitely that self which is encoded from since times immemorial. Once again I repeat that the idea of self which takes place in process of language learning in the mirror phase in any child, whether male or female, it is that idea of self which is encoded, which is codified with beginning, from the beginning, which is codified. So from the beginning it is taught that male they are sun, females they are moon, male they are intellectuals, bright, light, responsible, macho, masculine, so all these things, and opposite of this, females. So all these things, boys and girls, they learn automatically that how we have to live our life. Now the point is that the moment a child enters into the mirror phase, this mother turns into other. So bracketing up the M from the mother, and this is how othering starts. So, and from here, gendrical sense also starts. Otherwise, till 6 months, there was no sense of gender in the child, like whether a male child or female child. So now this starts male child and female child, and you may listen little girls and boys conversation, and you will be astonished to know that a 2 years and 3 years, 4 years brother instructing to a 5 years old sister that go inside. What is this? How this child is uttering this kind of expression? How he is giving this kind of expression? This is what process of socialization. Now, what is the stance of Lacan? Because he is deconstructionist. So Lacan says that this process of language, which is in symbolic phase, it is phallo-logocentric. Now look at the term which Lacan has given: phallo, that is phallus, and logos plus centric. That means language is patriarchal in nature. We have already gone through the logocentrism. Logocentrism, that means in Derrida world we have discussed all these logocentrism, that how entire system of knowledge or any such thing that is understandable to us, it exists in terms of the logos. So this is how language is logocentric in nature. Now one word, one prefix, this man has added before this logocentrism, that is phallus. That means language is not only logocentric in nature, but language is phallo-logocentric. That means meaning centered in the words, they all are encoded or codified from the angles and perspectives of men. Women, they are absent in this phallo-logocentric language system. So Lacan says that if a woman comes to read a text, if a woman is trying to perform her role as feminist, as a reader, female reader, it is impossible, right? Why it is impossible? Because they are figuration of phallic lack. What this man Freud has said, same thing, that women, they are figuration of what? Phallic lack. That means that same organ which women, they are lacking, and if they are not possessor, if they are not possessing that male body, male organ, then automatically they are born with this lack, and if they are born with this lack, they cannot be the organizing framework of the society. They cannot be that ultimate signifier of the family. They cannot be father. They will be always as mother. So they will be always secondary in terms of reading and writing. So first thing what he says, that a woman tries to do the feminist reading, it is impossible. Because if you come and read the text, and the problem is not in the performance, rather problem is in the entire writing. Like if you may understand this, like if there is problem in the root, right? If there is a tree and problem is in the root, then how far you can cut and how far you can sharpen the trunks and barks and branches and leaves and flowers of that tree. So meaning to say that if root is of banana tree, then there will be flowering of banana only. And if root is of rose tree, then you will have flowers like rose. So the problem is that how do you want to fit into the root of the banana tree this flower rose? I hope you understand my point. Like the problem is in the basic formula, in that basic pattern of language system from where language is constituted or language is made. If entire system is phallo-logocentric in nature, then how far, how long, how rigorously you try to change the interpretations, it is not possible, because there is problem is code, then performance cannot be too far than the code. So women, first of all, when they come to read a text from the feminist angle, the first thing that they can have temporary position, right? They can have temporary position of reading as female. And second, if they claim that we are reading permanently a text as female, it means it is just imposition, or they try to fit into the models given by these patriarchal codifiers. So declaration by Lacan is what? Women, they are figuration of phallic lack. So they do not have hope and scope for the feminine language or for feminine perspective. Now, Ecriture feminine, how it develops. So one more thing, that Lacan on this basis, he follows the crucial notion of post-structuralism, and in place of realist text, he prefers anti-realist text. That means he goes through the process of deconstruction, so that women, Dalit and all the marginal people, they may have some scope to come into the mainstream, just as it happens in Derridian deconstruction. Now, this Ecriture feminine or Elaine Showalter and Julia Kristeva, where are they interested? They catch directly this term phallo-logocentrism, and if you go through the Julia Kristeva analysis, she ditto takes the terms also. She talks about semiotic and symbolic, whereas Lacan talks about imaginary and symbolic. So semiotic is that imaginary and symbolic is the symbolic as Lacan has described. So the whole analysis is same to same of phallo-logocentrism is adopted by Kristeva, Elaine Showalter, Louis Iragheri and other French feminist critics, and on this basis they say that women, if they are figuration of the phallic lack, they are hopeless, that they cannot have their own identity in the process of reading and in the process of writing. So it is in vain that we are targeted to adhere necessary search of female identity, as Elaine Showalter says or suggests. So they deny to have any such thing, and Ecriture Feminine is focused upon those differences which are without locus. And they say that if, as per Freud and Lacan, the male organ of the male body is one particular organ, then women, they do not have any fixed organ, rather whole body is having capacity of textual process. So Julia Kristeva compares it with the sexual pleasure. So just as in any part, through any of the women part, you may have this kind of experience. It is the metaphorically nature of the female text that women, they are having enough capacity without any fixed locus, fixed position in their body. And this is how Ecriture Feminine is suggested by Kristeva with a neologism, puns, allusion, and she associates with surrealistic writing and avant-garde tradition also. So all in all, Ecriture Feminine, that means they highlight differences. But what kind of differences? Without any fixed difference, without any fixed position. Same is the case of Elaine Showalter, that she says that a whole body of women or the entire process of sexuality can be taken metaphorically as writing. But this language and the linguistical logic which they follow, it is a post-structuralist nature. So there is no such fixed category of the female reader or female writer. Anybody can read Ecriture Feminine and can be a feminist, because feminism, or to be a feminist, it is a kind of stance here. And this stance one may have if one is more focused on the text, not on the sex of the writer. So how text can be focused? Like same text you may read as male and same text you may read as female. Then it will be the deconstruction. Actually, Elaine Showalter is not suggesting here deconstruction. Elaine Showalter suggests that how in this Laugh of the Medusa, the article that she writes, the Laugh of the Medusa, and she writes that the women, they are called as dark continent. That means inexplorable, inexplicable. Means just like you enter in a dark room, and if you don't have the prior knowledge of the women, you cannot, if you enter in the dark room and you don't have prior knowledge of the structure and size of the room, you will be, pathless. You won't be able to discover the right thing to which you are targeted. In the same way, women are dark continent. So she said that yes, we all are eccentric and we have this eccentricity, but we are not going to stick with the tradition. We are not going to stick with any kind of fixed position of identity that is necessary search of female identity, because they believe in fallow logocentrism, and fallow logocentrism that is ultimately going to be demolished, and ultimately when deconstructive process of reading will be applied, it will be a loose grammatical structure, and if it will be a loose grammatical structure, then deconstruction will be followed. So the hope of Ecriture Feminine is in the imaginary phase of Lacan, when there is a child is having indistinguishable unity with mother. Now what is the hope of Ecriture Feminine? How these feminists, they are hopeful that there can be possibility of the language of women or women perspective through deconstruction. Just as you know that deconstruction talks about aporia. Aporia, that means the theoretical impasse. That means text deconstructive process of reading is intended to discover the disunity in place of unity. Deconstructive reading is targeted to bring into structure fractured structures and ruptures. That means organism unified structure of the text is to be inverted, and this is how you may discover the unconscious layer of the text. So in conscious form, anything is represented, it is most organized. In unconscious form, that that raw material you trace. So what these feminists they believe that actually imaginary phase of a child, both the child, male and female, imaginary phase of a child is just like that unconscious layer of mind where raw things are there, where original things are there. And as I mentioned that a child, whether male child or female child, both are close, or in fact they don't have identity of their own. If they have any identity, it is with the mothers, right? So the possibility of the motherly language, if there will be inversion of the position and in place of this phallologocentrism, because when deconstruction will be followed, this hierarchy will keep on changing. That means there will be play of the presence will take place, and if play of the presence will take place, then definitely the imaginary phase will be hopeful. Imaginary phase is having scope for motherly language or for feminine aspect or for motherly understanding, mother's emotions, that means feminine emotion. So in this way, these critiques who are defined under Ecriture feminine, they are hopeful for the female angles and female perspectives through the process of deconstruction. Now the point is that why I discussed for half an hour over this Ecriture feminine and Ecriture feminine then to Jack Lacan, because Showalter does all these discussions in her point defining feminine, gynocritics and women's test. So she mentions that this very act or this whole project of Ecriture feminine, it is utopian project. It is pointless project and it is not possible, because as per Showalter, it is just imagination. And as per Showalter, impossible for a female writer to write something without consciousness of the sex. Like and if you are conscious of your sex, that means you are conscious of your gender. And if you do gendrical writing, it doesn't mean that you attack on men. They may also do gendrical writing. You know, with this same statement I started this lecture I started with this same statement, that the problem comes where, that when a female text comes up with the feminine experiences, it is considered or it is associated with their temperament, with their victimization. But when men they come with their expression, their masculinity, it is considered that they have mastery over their emotion. Their experiences or the gendrical expression of men is universalized and it contains a kind of normalcy. Whereas women expression, feminine expression, it becomes discourse of a marginal. So Showalter, she just not critics, because both the ideologies are different, like the ideology of French and ideology of American. But Showalter says that you look at all these discourses. Philosophy of Showalter says that American's philosophy, that means my philosophy, and French feminist critics' philosophy is different to each other. But goal is one, our target is one. I should say our objective is one, and this objective is what? Women empowerment. So either you talk about American or French or British, there are apparently ideological differences, but these ideological differences can be summed up as per Elaine Showalter under one terminology that she calls as gynocritiques or gynocriticism. So from here she takes a challenge and she says that on the basis of unique female experiences, I will develop models of writing, and these models of writings are women writing and biology, language, psychology and culture. So in my next lecture, I will deal with these 4 points one by one, and I hope concepts are clear to you. In case of any discrepancy, any argument, any question, please you go through the videos and comment in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thank you.